My name is Meredith Wiggins. I am the Assistant Director for Career Services at the University of Kansas School of Law, and I am a former Assistant Director at the University Career Center, where I worked with education and helping professions. And I will be serving as your facilitator, excuse me, for today's Closing the Gap discussion. And I will start by briefly letting you know about the structure of this panel, and then we'll let our panelists introduce themselves and we'll move into our discussion. So we're going to have a panel discussion to start with our wonderful panelists, some of whom have been talking right now, and a couple of whom I've seen have just jumped on. So we'll have that discussion for 45 minutes to an hour or so on topics that were submitted by students and generated by staff and members of our team. And then we'll be splitting into breakout rooms after the conclusion of the panel. And one of our committee members will be adding you to the breakout room that you chose when you registered your name. And if it turns out that you've decided you'd like to be in another room, you can message Marshall Miller in the chat, and he will handle getting you switched into the new room that you're interested in taking part in.
Hey, Meredith, can I jump in real quick? Just touch on, I'm also going to be throughout the panel renaming you. It'll help with the breakout rooms, getting everywhere where they want to go. So if you see your name all of a sudden being changed, don't panic. Nothing bad is happening. I'm just putting you either in the salary negotiations, crucial conversations, putting a label on it so that way I can get you in the right spot. And like Meredith said, if that's no longer where you're wanting to go, just shoot me a message in the Zoom chat and we'll get you taken care of.
All right, so now I'll go ahead and let you know that our panelists this evening are Jackie McLean, Brittany Foltz, Francis Soto, and Karen Francis. And I thought that our panelists could start by briefly introducing themselves and talking a little bit about the work that it is that you do and how it intersects with our topic here tonight. Why don't we start with Brittany Foltz?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Foltz. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the University of Kansas in the Office of Institutional Opportunity and Access as a Title IX EEO investigator. And I believe that the work that we do intersects with looking at pay disparity, particularly when we look at whether or not pay disparity is based on your membership in a protected class. Was it based on your gender? Was it based on your race? Was it based on a disability, national origin, all of those things? And so that's what we look for when folks make reports about experiencing pay disparities. Those are some of the factors that we look at.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brittany. Karen Francis, would you like to go next?
I sure would. Thank you. And Brittany, I know the Title IX is going to be changing under the new Secretary of Education. Thank God. So I'm Karen Francis, and I am a retired high school administrator. Since I retired, now I am a full-time volunteer focusing in on social justice issues, primarily with the American Association of University Women, which is a gender equity advocacy organization. My main focus is on right now, it's on racial justice, voter protection, voter suppression, and equality for women in all phases of their life. So I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I can be a full-time volunteer, and I absolutely love it. And thank you for the opportunity to meet with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. Francis, would you like to go next?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I am Francis Soto. I use they, them pronouns, gender neutral. I currently am an academic advisor in the Undergraduate Advising Center at the University of Kansas. A lot of the work that I do it has to be intersectional for the sake of the students. Oftentimes the work that I do does intersect with financial stability as well. And then additionally, I'm not necessarily a career coach, but I do also have students that meet with me to discuss where they are currently in their academics and what that means for them moving forward after they leave the university. I come also from a business background. So I have quite a bit of management experience, and I can definitely talk about what that looks like coming from that kind of a work into advising as well.
Great, thank you. And Jackie McLean, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Okay, I'm retired too. I spent 30 years with administrative experience in higher education, human resources, diversity, and public safety. My majority of my experience was at institutions of higher education, University of Kansas, University of Missouri, University of Michigan, and I retired as the Vice Chancellor of the CSU system here in California. I did serve a little while as the personnel director in the city of Lawrence, switching back and forth with my husband and I being in two different communities. It was an interim step. I have served as part of the executive team, and I've done a lot of the executive coaching and trying to help women move into executive positions and negotiate for their salary in those positions. Currently, in my retirement, I am also an AAUW volunteer and engaged in starting a student chapter here in Chico, California of AAUW, focusing on diversity and inclusion. And I'm chair of the Capital Corridor chapter of SCORE, which is a volunteer organization that provides free business advice to small business owners. And my section that I chair covers from Stockton, California to the Oregon border, so about half of the state of California. And we're doing a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion, trying to make sure that we provide service to business owners with all different kinds of backgrounds.
Wonderful. I'm glad that we have such a range of experiences in our panelists. I think that'll make for a much richer discussion. So our first question that we have is a pretty purposefully broad one. And it's, what's an aspect of the gender wage gap conversation that you tend to think maybe gets overlooked or maybe purposefully ignored? Frances, would you like to start?
Sure. I think something that is purposefully ignored is really the lack of support that primarily women and femme people have in these kinds of areas. Oftentimes people will say, well, you know, how can there be a wage gap when everybody's working the same, and et cetera. But the reality is we see a lot of that wage gap occur when women and femmes take paternal leave. You know, the fact that they are no longer working. And that's just one example of where we see that. I feel like that's always vastly overlooked, that, you know, the fact that we put so much emphasis on mothers to have the career and then also to take care of the kids at home. I think that's something that's definitely not looked at hard enough. You know, and additionally, something that we also need to deconstruct a little bit more is when we look at the wage gap, we also need to look a little bit further and look at the racial disparities within as well. And that's something, because we can say all women and femmes, we can say that as a very general, broad term, but the fact remains is that, you know, Black women, Latino women, pretty much any non-white woman, femme, is paid less. You know, and so a lot of that also bleeds into the fact that a lot of these people are doing additional labor that shouldn't be required of them. A lot of it is emotional labor. You know, a lot of it is the labor of deconstructing and decolonizing spaces as well. So there is a lot of additional labor that goes into each of these points of view and these backgrounds. And I think that we definitely need to talk about it, you know, not just from a familial point of view, but also break that down even further and look at it from a racial standpoint as well. These are really important conversations that need to be had. Something that I challenge people all the time is, you know, ask each other what you're making. It's okay to have that conversation. It is okay to ask your coworker, hey, how much do you make? And of course that everybody has their restrictions and their boundaries around that conversation. Some people are more open with finances than others, and that's always a personal matter. But at the end of the day, oftentimes the institutions, the corporations, the pretty much most workplaces, they will often tell you to keep hush hush about what you make. I myself have been in that situation where I was told, oh, you're starting entry level, but don't tell the other people that you're making as much as they are because they've been here longer or whatever. So those are things that we also have to discuss as well. So ask your coworkers if they're comfortable talking about that. That's a really great place to start working on closing the gap.
Absolutely. Karen and Brittany, I've seen you both nodding your heads throughout everything that Frances was saying. Would either of you like to go next and weigh in on this?
Brittany, okay, Brittany, you want to go first?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
We sure can.
Okay. My internet's kind of acting up, so I just want to make sure. I definitely agree with what they said. One of the things that we are going to ask questions about when folks come and say, hey, I think that there is a significant disparity between what I'm making versus my counterpart, right? It really boils down to that lack of transparency about pay. And one of the things I really appreciate is that when I've been looking at job descriptions lately, that the state of Colorado is requiring that anybody who wants to hire any of their state, citizens, you need to post what the job salary is. And I think that it's really, for me, very refreshing to see that you can't kind of hide and get away with being so secretive in something that really could be life or death for folks and their ability to live, right? And that brings me to the other point when we're talking about pay disparity. I think it's even how we normalize the language that we use about pay, right? I want to be able to work a job where I can enjoy it because I can live. I can't work a job and want to be able to focus on it and pay attention to it when I'm also stressing about whether or not I can keep my lights on, whether or not I can keep my car, whether or not I can keep my home, or I can feed my dependents or myself, right? So I really think when we're talking about pay, I think really looking at it in this holistic view and not just this monetary view is really how we can dismantle these disparities and create some more equitable conversations and changes to how we really elevate folks in their desire to have an employment.
When I think about the pay gap, it's we really have to look at this as a family issue. When you look at how many women are, I think it's like 40% of women are either the sole breadwinner or the partial breadwinner in their particular family. And the most important thing, and I know a lot of you on this call are still in school, chances are you're probably going to go for an advanced degree in your lifetime. If you do not start equal to your male counterpart who is sitting right next to you in your class, getting the same degree that you were getting, going for the same job over your lifetime, if you do not negotiate for salaries, you could lose up to $2.5 million over your lifetime. Think about that. What could you do with $2.5 million? It's like $700,000 if you just graduate from high school. So you can, I mean, it is a lifelong issue and it has to be addressed from the very beginning. We know the causes. We know it's based on discrimination. I'm glad, Frances, I think you mentioned about the motherhood penalty, but I don't know if all of you realize that as women choose to become mothers and maybe take time off to raise their family, for every child they have, their salary goes down. But it's been documented that when a man becomes a father, he gets the father bump. So he gets paid more money. So we need to constantly be talking about these issues and not be afraid not to bring it up. And I will do a big push right now for AUW's program that all of you can take online free of charge called WorkSmart. And it goes piece by piece by piece on what you need to do as you enter the workforce. And it's not just salary sometimes that you're negotiating. There are a lot of different things that you can negotiate, but the great thing about WorkSmart is you can do it whenever you have like free time, like at 3 a.m. in the morning, but it takes about 90 minutes. And think about what you could do like in 75 minutes to 90 minutes. You can watch a couple of TV shows. Maybe you could cook a dinner. You could go see a movie, but this is a life skill. And it's not just talking about salaries. You negotiate all your life when you go and buy a car. Women in my age bracket, you can tell I'm old, that some of my friends, when they went to buy a car, even though they were earning more money than their husband, the husband was the one who got the contract, even though she was making more money. So it has not changed that much. And I got a report from the St. Louis Globe Democrat dated 1970. So that was a year before I graduated from college. And the number one thing was they wanted women to be feminine. You know, so we've come a long way since 1970, but not where we need to be. So you can't always count on, if you choose to have a partner, that you're always going to be together. But we know that there are cultural biases out there, and we need to talk about that. And Brittany, I think you were the one who brought up about the different salary gaps. We know we just celebrated on the 24th Equal Pay Day for women, and the criteria for that was all women working full-time on the March 24th, from January 1st to the 24th of March. Basically, you were working for free. Think about that. If you are a Black woman, your Equal Pay Day this year will be August 3rd. If you are a Native American, it will be September 8th. And if you are a Latina, October 21st, to get equal pay with your male counterpart. So it is a lifelong issue. We have to do something about it, and we've got to change the laws that make some of these changes happen. So I'm glad we're going to be talking about legislation in a few minutes, because that is my big thing. Thank you, everybody.
Before we move on from that, we did have a question from one of our audience members asking if we had information about the gender pay gap for Asian American women. I have that.
I know that. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say it. I have that information for.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have it outside of the legal field.
I'm glad you did, because I know there's Asian American women. Theirs came a little bit before the pay gap day. However, other women in that category, Native women and what's the other one? Their payday is later. So I appreciate that question. So thank you. Thank you.
And Jackie?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to try and make it short because I know we've got a lot of other questions to answer. Of course, I agree with all the things that my predecessor said. One of my proudest achievements was getting University of Michigan named one of the top 10 family-friendly employers in the United States when I was there. And I think that we don't teach anyone how to negotiate salaries. The single most determining factor of how much money you will earn with any employer is how much you start with. People will think I'll start low, but I'll be an outstanding employee and I'll get increases and I'll get to where I need to go. That doesn't happen. You need to start at the beginning, negotiating. We don't teach people how to evaluate their worth. We don't teach them how to look at the marketplace and see what the range of pay is for a job and what factors play in. So I think the most overlooked part of this whole thing is getting the skills to people for how to negotiate and how to keep their place in the workplace as they go through. And I know we're going to be talking about some things later that will address some of those issues, but I really focus on the negotiation as the thing that we're missing out on. I think a lot of us have awareness about the gap, but we don't know what to do about it. And we don't know where to begin to make a change. And you begin to make the change when you learn the skills you need to negotiate when you go in for a job. I'll let it go at that.
Wonderful. I really appreciate, like I said, I really appreciate the breadth of answers that we got there and how much we touched on. It leads into a question that was both sent in to us by one of our audience members and that we're hoping to touch on anyway, which is that there is often a narrative that part of what explains the gender wage gap or the racial gender wage gap is that the kinds of work women often choose versus the kinds of work that men tend to choose. And in fact, the question that we received said, is there a natural wage gap because women tend to choose careers that naturally pay less? What do you think about that idea? I'm very, very interested in hearing how you respond to that idea of the kinds of careers that people choose and the kinds of salaries that often come along with those careers. Annette, whoever wants to start, right ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. So just thinking about like the work, again, kind of taking it back to the work that I do, you know, that's really one of the questions that we're asking and we want people to look at is we're asking, is somebody similarly situated to you? Should they be making the same? We look at the job description. And one of the things that I want to encourage people to think about is that even the subtleties and the difference of job description can be used to justify why somebody can or can't make more money. And oftentimes that is a way for people to gatekeep. So I want you to think about different methods that companies and businesses use to gatekeep their money and to be very intentional about who has access to that money. On the other side of that, one of the things that I want to encourage folks to know and think about is that historically, because we've always undervalued the care of women, the value of women, folks who work in spaces that are held predominantly for folks who identify as women or femme are going to be, again, less invested in. And you see that when you think about the women's suffrage, you think about that when you see about how we even learned about OBGYN. You use Black women's bodies who were already desecrated from slavery to help teach you how to take care of women. Now you have women who are like, I want to take care of other women in their bodies, but you're not going to make the same as that. So I think we have to look at the historical context of how we value the jobs for folks that work in spaces held for women. And I think on the other side of that too is how we even give folks access to get those jobs, and it's by gatekeeping education. So it's just a big systemic cycle that makes us kind of feel like we're just spinning our wheels in a hamster wheel. Like I'm trying to go somewhere, but I'm really not going anywhere. And it's because it's the same wheel, it's just a different color. The owner switches it out and changes the color. So you're like, oh, I got a new wheel. I'm so excited. And then you're like, oh, I didn't. it's just shinier. The last one had glitter. This one is like changes color. It's a mood ring, right? You know, it's just how it is. And so I think it's very, very important that you pay attention to the fine details, pay attention to those subtleties, because that's what people use to come back and say, oh, well, see, I didn't discriminate because, see, look here, there's this little difference. Or they had more professional development. Well, you gave it to them. You didn't give me access to that. And I should be afforded the same opportunity for professional development to level the playing field. So,
And I'll chime in. It's very important that young women are introduced and see themselves in some of these other positions. So it is so important that we really stress the STEM fields. Also, it is important that, and I know we've talked about negotiations a lot. It's one thing to talk about negotiation, but it's important to have time to practice how to do negotiating. I can't, I'm going to reflect as I was a high school principal, and I was doing one of the last post observation conferences with one of our teachers who was teaching calculus. And I always would look at the interactions between the teacher and the students asking questions. And I asked him, I said, not one of the girls participated in the discussion. Aren't they aware of what is going on? And he looked at me and he said, no, they are making the highest grades. And I said, then why aren't they participating? So a couple of weeks later, and he was right like a month from retiring, I went back in and do his last interview, and I saw a difference. And he said no one had ever mentioned that to him, that we do not call on our girls. And we really do need to do a better job in the educational field to stress young women going into STEM fields. And when men go into fields that are predominantly women's fields, the salaries go down. Or there are cases here in St. Louis where men go into nursing, same degree, and they get more money than their female counterparts. So we have, like I'm saying, we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm glad that we're talking about women being prepared. But the new frontier really is STEM fields and making sure that we have women leadership in those fields, because it's been documented that the best leadership skills, women have those, but they are not at that top rung to be the decision makers. And I'll share one more thing, that if it's a very competitive, and I just learned this from an interview last week with the Tory Burch Foundation, that if it's a competitive position, that men have the edge because there are so many applications. They will just kind of go through them really quick, and that really hurts women. So if and when you choose to have children, I said if and when, maybe think about a gender neutral name, so you aren't automatically discriminated against because you're a female or you're a particular ethnic. You know, that's another area that we really need to address, that that form of discrimination goes on also. So those are just some of my long-term things for you to think about.
I graduated law school early enough that there weren't women in labor law. And that was my area of expertise and area I wanted to work with. And I went straight out of law school in as a labor negotiator for the University of Missouri system. But I've dealt for over 30 years with issues of compensation systems. And we're not going to see equal pay for equal work until we see systems that evaluate the complexity of jobs in a way that is gender and race neutral, that looks at the tasks and really evaluates the tasks and the complexity. We have far too much I'll call social commentary that plays into the evaluation of jobs. And I agree, I was shaking my head, yes. The statistical data I have seen is that when men go into predominantly female fields, they're paid more than the females in that field. I haven't seen it pull the salary down overall. I have seen them get paid more than women who have been doing the exact same job for many, many years. So I don't think it has anything to do with where women choose to work. I think it has everything to do with how society values those skills that tend to be in professions that are predominantly female. So that's my
Yeah, I also think it's really important the way that we talk about the word choice. Choice can often be a myth. Some people really don't have choice, you know, and this is really where, you know, and so far everything that everybody has said so far is everything that I agree with, you know, but when we talk about that word specifically, what happens when there aren't those kinds of opportunities where somebody is located? To have to relocate to go somewhere else, I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever moved before. That costs money. You know, I've spent money on things like rental trucks, moving services, whatnot. On top of that, we compound everything else that is going on in somebody's life. So, you know, when we talk about things like people choosing that kind of job, we also have to ask, you know, was it really a choice or was that what was available? You know, which then leads me into the next point that we, you know, just as a society, we really just need to pay people a living wage in whatever they do. It doesn't matter if you're cleaning toilets or you're working at a 5-star restaurant. You know, the fact remains that there is no such thing as unskilled labor. I dislike that term greatly. Skill comes in many forms. You know, the people who make my coffee at Starbucks, I have no idea what they're doing, but they give me a coffee and it makes me feel great, and I wouldn't be able to start my day without that. You know, and oftentimes we take for granted the fact that people are working these unskilled jobs, you know, as a way to, you know, maybe work into something else, or maybe it's your part-time gig, or maybe they're a teenager trying to get a job. Actually, the fact is, most people who work at McDonald's are over the age of 30. You know, teenagers in the workforce are a very small percentage, even in things like fast food. So, you know, when we talk about choice, we really have to talk about what are the available opportunities, and are those opportunities supported? So are they supported with benefits? Are they supported with a living wage? Is this person going to have to work multiple jobs to make ends meet? That's not really a choice either, you know? So the word choice, when it comes to you know, finding that career that works, or, you know, finding the job that you can do right now, choice is a very dangerous word sometimes, and I think we really need to think about that as well.
Yes, thank you for calling our attention to that. One thing that I'm hearing throughout all of your answers so far is that tension between needing to spend time focusing on individual tactics that can move each of us forward on our own, but also needing to push for larger systemic reform. So how can we push for more radical solutions to this problem? And some examples that we thought of were perhaps reducing the salaries of higher compensated employees whose work has been historically subsidized by the systemic gender and racial pay gap, excuse me, in order to compensate employees at an equal wage. or other types of more radical changes? How can we begin advocating for and pushing for those?
Let me take this one from the very beginning. Radical changes are going to come from something that is imposed. And I am so glad, I think, Francis, you talked about the fair wage. It's going to come from legislation. It really is. And we're talking about, I think that was one of the questions, what is out there right now? We've got the Paycheck Fairness Act that would guarantee that discriminational practices are going to be eliminated, such as talking about your past salary history. We've got the fair wage. That is the minimum wage. And Francis, I'm very glad you mentioned it, that the people who are working the minimum wage are not teenagers. It's amazing. And I've got the stats somewhere, the percentage that are the age group of the minimum wage worker. But in order for us to have legislation, we have to get the right people into office. And in order to do that, we have to use our voice at the ballot box. So number one right now is the issue with voter suppression. We saw what is going on in Georgia. There are 43 states that have like 300 and plus voter suppression laws going through. If we don't have our voice heard, we're not going to be able to make those changes. And when I think about the number one issue right now, it really is the issue of voter suppression. Think about women only have had the right to vote for 100 years. And it wasn't until 1964 with the Voter Rights Act that Black women were allowed to vote. So we have not had our voices heard that long, but we really need to get out there and make sure that we call our legislators, that we belong to these organizations that are fighting voter suppression. So I am very active with Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, and I know they are nationwide. We are political, we're nonpartisan. We just want everyone to have the right to vote and have their vote counted. And these voter suppression laws are just killing us. They are trying to take away the voice of people, but there are quite a few bills that are out there, like I said, that we really need to be pushing. But right now, HR 1 already went through the House and now it's in the Senate for All the People Act, and that would eliminate so many of these voter suppression actions that are going on. And Missouri is one of those. I haven't followed Kansas to know where you are, but it is very, very scary. That is one of our most important rights, is the right to vote and have our voice heard. And we really need to ramp it up. And just to share that we do need to have people get out and vote. Just 2 weeks ago, St. Louis had a new ballot initiative where it's called an approval ballot. It was only in St. Louis and Fargo, North Dakota, where people were able to vote on everyone on the ballot who they thought would be a good mayor. Only 22% of the people voted. So that means the people that are at the top of the ticket, there's 2 women going for the position, but your voice does count. It really does. And I hope all of you hear the passion I have that we cannot let voter suppression continue. So I'll be quiet.
I want to speak to the issue of the takeaway that's suggested. And after 30 years of doing labor negotiations with a lot of unions, I would tell you that takeaways are almost impossible to negotiate. And even when you achieve them, they don't last, because if you don't change the underlying system, people will redo things after you, You take money from Peter to pay Paul, and you're going to find the next time pay increases come around, Peter's going to get more money than Paul does, and pretty soon they're going to be back in the same position they were in before. I agree that we've got to have our voice. Our voice in voting is important. Our voice in organizations is incredibly important, and it's hard to be the voice that speaks up when nobody else is saying this isn't a fair system. This system needs to be changed this way in order for this to be a fair system. But we needed to do it at the ballot box, there's no doubt. But I think that it's important that we also recognize that you can be a leader for equity wherever you are by being vocal about the principles that need to be implemented in whatever situation you're in. And it's absolutely critical that you push for positive change. And I just wouldn't, for the most part, go for takeaways. I would go for add-ons.
Francis, Brittany?
Oh, go ahead, Brittany.
This is a real Kansas standoff. We're all deferring. Brittany, would you please go ahead?
Sorry, everything just went black. Okay, there you all are.
I had the same thing happen.
I would say I think one of the big things in terms of really addressing systemic changes is looking. Some people think you got to start big to start small. Some people think you got to start small to start big. But I think when you think about it from starting small to starting big, is really thinking about where there are points of solidarity in your spaces to really challenge and hold your places accountable. And within that, thinking about who has the privilege to do that. So I think about this conversation that's been happening in Hollywood, right? Like you think about Octavia Spencer, Viola Davis, you think of folks that have been doing the work for years and years, but you see the same spaces, the same faces on the billboards, the same faces that are having access to sit at the table and promote really dumb movies. Like some of these movies are just dumb. But because of their whiteness, because of their space as women, even as men in these spaces, as non-trans folks, as cis folks, right, they're able to get a callback. They're able to be in front of the door. And so this push to say, wait, there are these severe disparities between folks that are even highly qualified and these women saying, you know what, I'm just as culpable. Let me check myself and let me check my privilege. Now let me use my privilege. So, recently Jessica Chastain was doing a movie with Octavia Spencer and was like, yo, they're not paying you enough money. So I'm going to tell them they need to pay you the same amount of money I'm getting. They either need to take it from my salary or they need to figure it out. But I'm going to ride for you until the end. Um, Michelle Williams, when she did one movie, she found out that they found out one of the male co-actors found out that she did not get paid enough. And so he said, y'all need to take it from my salary because that's not okay. So it's really in those micro spaces, really finding those moments of points where you can engage in solidarity work and then from there building upon that to put accountability measures in place. But I think going back to these voting rights and really voter suppression, those large scale movements are how you address things at a federal, state, a county, systemic level to hold entities accountable within the states. So now you have like Delta CEO who all of a sudden was like, I love me some voter suppression and I think the Georgia law is great. And people were like, no, that's not gonna work for me. Try that again. Then he came back, he was like, wait a minute, it's horrible. Shouldn't do that. Let's try this again. Right. There is power in those voices to make that change. And it comes to our money. It comes to our money. It comes to where we choose to invest and where we say, actually, you don't have value. And we're not we're done, right? So I think when we're talking about pay disparities and pay equity, we got to start from both sides and work our way in. That's really the only way you can make the changes that you really want to make that can be long lasting. So just my thought.
Yeah, Brittany went ahead and said a lot of things that I was gonna go towards. I mean, yes, there are larger systemic things that we can work on. We can work on legislation. We can work on grassroots organizing, and all of those things are really important. That's just one side, though, because there are things that we can continue to do every day when you're in the office, whatever your work is, where you can step up and you can say something about that. If you see that a woman is also working and doing the same job as you, but because she's Black, she's making less, what is your responsibility there? And it starts with taking a little bit more of an empathetic approach here. It starts with taking some or doing some perspective taking. Allyship is one thing, but being an accomplice is something else. So be an accomplice is what I'm gonna say, and that extends to everybody who is marginalized. What do you have in your position, in this world when we look at all of the intersectionalities and we look at all the privileges that we have? What can you do to change the workplace that you are currently in? Is it talking to your boss about how there seems to be like 3 Black people in the office and everybody else is white? Is it about just general, wage gap issues that a male coworker is making more than you? Look around the room and see who isn't there. That's where we can start with that. And, yeah, that means if you're looking at applicants, yeah, go ahead and take a look at the ones who may be more marginalized on the appearance, just on the outside. Because if you don't have that representation in your space, then we're not really going to get anywhere with equitable pay. And it starts, and I'm not just talking about race, I'm also talking about transgender women make less money than men as well. And that's something to consider too. When we look at all of these different intersections, race and gender, sexuality, all of these things, even class, where you may come from, those are all things that play a part in the way that you're perceived in the world. And that perception is important and it can be dangerous. It's kind of a double-edged sword there. So my challenge to everybody is, what can you do to be an accomplice? That's something that you can do starting today, honestly. And yes, go out and vote, call your legislators, get into organizing, on a bigger scale, but, we do all have a personal responsibility here to throw the rope back, to throw the lead back to somebody so that they too can climb up. So, just to kind of add on everything else everybody has said, I totally agree with, but that's just my little extra sprinkles on there.
And I would add being a hand up for someone, and I would be amiss if I did not mention about legislation. The Equal Rights Amendment, I think a lot of young women think that they do have equal rights in the Constitution, and we do not. The 14th Amendment did not guarantee that, so we still do not have it, so we're still fighting it, even though we have the 38 states. Now the Senate is fighting if they're going to make it be held to a certain timeline. So I would be amiss if I did not mention that, because as I have worked with other young women, well, we already got equal rights. No, you do not. It is not protected in the Constitution.
We have just under 10 minutes left before we'll head into our breakout rooms. And we had some more questions, but we really touched on a lot of them. So I thought we might deviate a little bit from the script. And I'd like to ask you, what's one thing that makes you excited about the prospect of doing this work? Either something that keeps you energized or has made you feel like engaged in the work, has made you feel like you want to keep going on, or that has, I just keep coming back to what's one thing that's making you feel excited about the possibilities here and the change that we can make?
Let me go first with this. When I retired, I worked with a life coach for an entire year to transition out from being a high school administrator into what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And as I worked through the process, so I'm saying that as you make transitions, reach out to see who can help you with those transitions. But I needed to find an organization that gave voice to women and families who did not have a voice. And I have found it at the national level with AAUW. I have found it locally. I have found it just with little groups. And Francis, I am so glad you mentioned that when we see something, we have to speak up. And on a personal level, this goes along with my breakout in terms of systemic change. I was the first female in my high school to be an administrator, it was all men. And it was, why do kids want to come and see you? I said, it's because maybe I listen. Teachers were upset that I did not suspend students out of school. When I had an option to do a parent conference or a suspension, I always did the parent conference. Jump forward a couple of years, a position was opened up and I was not given an opportunity to apply for it. So I called and I said, okay, what do we do if a person feels that they have been overlooked for a position? And they said, well, Karen, have the teacher call us. I said, no, it's not a teacher, it is me. Jump forward a couple of weeks, the superintendent called and I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And he wanted to know what happened, why I was concerned about this. The person who was going to be given the position without an interview, his name was pulled from that job. Jump forward 3 more years, he became my head principal and he came at me with everything he could. I'm not going down silent, so I got an attorney and I won. If you know that you have, and fortunately, I was in a position where I could afford an attorney. Not everybody would be in that, but if there's something wrong, you've got to fight to change it. And you also have to be true to yourself. What is the right way to handle things? And I'm so glad you mentioned about pulling somebody a hand up, So thank you for everyone for letting us share some of our insights with you.
Would anyone else like to share something that makes them feel energized before we move into our breakout rooms?
I would say, I think I have just come out of a very dark period. I've spent most of my professional life working on issues of diversity and inclusion. When I was at KU as a secretary, 24% of the secretaries had college degrees. There was no training program. There was nothing for professional development. And I organized the office and clerical workers into an advisory group with administration to get it going. And that was one of the first organizational kinds of things that I did. But I spent my life fighting those kinds of issues every place I went. And I saw us go through a period recently where we lost a lot of ground and a lot of things were being looked away from and let happen that I found really discouraging. I think I find hope now in that I see people pulling together and saying we're not going to let this negative continue. We are going to take these steps, and we're beginning to see some steps that are being taken. I think it has to happen at every level. It does have to happen where you are at home, whether it's on your job, in your community, whatever. the big national stuff doesn't happen if the little stuff on the day-to-day level does not happen. And you have to have the courage to say something isn't right. And here's how I think it could be made better. And I never went with a complaint that I didn't go with some ideas to fix it. And I see so many bright ideas from young women and young people of color that I am working with now that I find hope in that. And I hope that we'll continue on and get back where we were, because we've dropped back. We've got some ground to cover to get back to where we were a while ago. And there's a lot ahead of us that needs to be done. But I see people with creativity and energy willing to invest to do that. And that gives me a lot of joy.
Brittany?
COVID has really hurt us. COVID has really hurt women.
Francis?
Yeah, I would just, oh, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say very quickly, the thing that sticks out to me that I'm seeing is people feeling more empowered to advocate for themselves and to seek out resources and services to help them on their journey. And so I just think that that's a testament to the fact that there's more knowledge and information out there. Again, there is definitely some gatekeeping to accessing that. And it's really about how are we giving people social and cultural capital to be able to feel comfortable navigating, advocating for pay, negotiating their pay, negotiating all facets, benefits, all of those things that can really impact their livelihood in the professional field. But the advocacy and empowerment I'm seeing is just really inspiring in me.
Kind of in a similar vein, I have noticed people are more willing to have these conversations. I think that's probably one of the most exciting things is people are understanding more that these are things that we need to talk about. Additionally, I'm just always excited to advocate for others, period, regardless in what that is. Every day in my work, I do some kind of advocate work on behalf of my students, and I look at that at all different levels, and I go beyond just what is seen on the surface. And I know I've said this before, but I take an empathetic approach to everything I do, and when I see that somebody responds to that and they're open to that, I then get excited to have a genuine, honest conversation. How do we get there? It can take a little bit of vulnerability. It can take some honesty. There may be times where you have to sit down and you feel some discomfort about what maybe somebody has said to you about maybe the privilege that you have. Sit with that discomfort for a little bit, unpack that. What does that mean? And that's kind of one of the things that I'm always looking for. I still am energized whether people want to hear it or not. So I think, it's, and having that kind of an attitude can be exhausting. So really look at what you have the capacity to do. And that's where I tell others, lean on me for support. What can I do for you? What does this office space or this workspace need so that we can feel supported? And even having those conversations lead to changes that we're looking for, lead to people feeling valued. If I can value somebody and I can give them value and they're, overjoyed with that, and I see that gives me energy. So, everything that everybody said, yes, on top of that, You know, I'm just excited to find those opportunities where I can advocate.
Okay.
And you're never too old not to advocate, because I'm 72.
Yeah.
All right, I like that as a place to wrap up. Marshall Miller will be moving you into your breakout rooms now, and you can leave the Zoom from your breakout room once your session has concluded. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your insight and your thoughts. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you in your breakout room soon.